Glad to welcome you once again for us to continue our studies on the theme correcting wrong practices and teachings in Christianity. Our focus is going to be on women pastors and preachers. A lot of people who support this teaching give their own reasons that number one, women possess more qualities than men. Some women have more leadership qualities than men, and therefore they should be allowed to be pastors. Another reason is that some people point to the Old Testament that there were women who were leaders, and therefore there's nothing wrong for women to emerge as pastors in the church today. Also, those who support this teaching give their reasons that denying women from becoming pastors, we sound like looking down on them or making them look like they are less important people, and many other reasons that people give in support of this teaching. But what we are going to do in the course of today's discussion is to look at the scriptures, to go in depth in the scripture to see what does the Bible say concerning the leadership structure of the church. The first thing you need to understand is that the leadership structure or organization of the church is already designed by God, and no man has authority to do otherwise. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 25, and Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8. In this passage, we are told that the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom. The weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. And here we are told that the ways of the Lord are not the ways of man. So we must be very careful to follow the instructions of God, no matter how foolish they may seem to us humans. Another point is that the offices of pastors and deacons clearly refer to male genders and not female genders. You look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 to 12. Titus chapter 1, verses 5 to 9. In these passages, you hear there is a saying that a pastor must be a husband of one wife, must be a husband of one wife. And that clearly excludes women. So let's pay attention to that very well. Women are commanded to be silent in all churches of God. They are to learn in full silence, and they are to learn in silence and full submission. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 34, and 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11 through 12. And then some people will say, what about women like Deborah, Miriam, and Huda in the Old Testament who became leaders? The thing you need to understand is that the Old Testament paradigm of leadership is different from the New Testament structure of leadership. So we shouldn't compare. We shouldn't bring the Old Testament style of leadership that it must be this way. God has arranged a different leadership structure in the church today, and that excludes women. Okay? Another one is, what about Priscilla and Phoebe, who are mentioned in the New Testament? You look at Acts chapter 18, verse 26, Romans chapter 16, verse 1. But you need to understand that there is no record that these women served as pastors in the church. They were all servants of God. All Christians today, including Christian women, are servants of God, and they serve in one capacity or the other. So the leadership structure is only reserved in the hands of men. Women are not to be pastors. That is the point. Concluding points to note. 1. The silence of women in churches means do not exercise spiritual authority or leadership over men. That is what that silence means. So the silence is not general. The silence is specific in terms of leadership, usurping leadership authority, spiritual leadership authority over man in the church of God. 2. They are not to lead in congregational prayers. That is another thing. But they can pray, but they are not to lead in congregational prayer. You can see 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 8, which commands that all men everywhere should pray. Okay? Another point is that they are not to lead in congregational singing. But then they say they are to sing, but they are not to lead in the singing, but they are to participate in the singing. Another point, again, is that they can teach children and their fellow women. This is found in Titus chapter 2, verse 3 and verse 4. Also, they can teach others the gospel of Christ, because the command to preach the gospel to others is equally for women, for Christian women. So they have the right to preach to others. They have the right to move around and tell others about the gospel of Christ, but not to become pastors in the Lord's church, in the church. You can see the record in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, verse 18 to 20. And you can see the record of a woman who called someone aside and explained the word of God to Priscilla in Acts chapter 18, verse 24 through 26. Also, Christian women can serve the church in other areas, but not as pastors and deacons. You can see in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 to 11, that all Christians are given different gifts for the edification of the church. They can serve the church in many other areas, but not as pastors. Women like Priscilla, Phoebe, Mary, Tryphaena, and Tryphosa, etc., worked hard in the Lord, even though they were not pastors and deacons. You can see the record in Romans chapter 16, verse 1 through 14. So the point here is that this does not in any way make women look less important, but this is the structure of leadership in the church that God has laid, and it must be obeyed. Thank you, and God bless you for watching.